welcome, folks. This is the Legislative Advisory Committee on the State House, and we're picking up from a discussion of last week that we had, that we're going to be starting our agenda this week with trying to figure out how we can set, if we do, a building capacity number or level for the State House. To help our Capitol Police as well as help our Sergeant at Arms manage in terms of the world of COVID and airflow, and also fire safety and security, moving people in case that there's a need for evacuation of the building. What is our capacity level? So this past week, our Sergeant at Arms and our Capitol Police did some work, and I'll turn it over to you folks.
Good afternoon, Matthew Romeo, Capitol Police Chief. For the record, I appreciate the opportunity to come back. In response to the request from last week, I sat down with our Deputy State Fire Marshal for the area, for this area yesterday. And just to kind of recap some of the challenges of building capacity determination for this size, and to kind of give you an idea of how we approach this topic. You know, building capacity is generally restricted by the ability to get everything out. So there's some measurements that you take on how wide an exit is. From that, there's some factors you apply to it to determine this many people can successfully exit through this exit at a period of time. And then we start looking at building evacuation plans. So for instance, there's 3 different zones of the building that evacuate through the east door. And no single one of those zones can exceed the maximum capacity of that door. So we start looking back from that exit pathway to determine what our maximums are. And then we kind of go to the other end and we start looking at spaces within the building. When you start looking at fire codes, buildings fall into a category. This one most likely falls into what's called an assembly occupancy. And it's based on what you're doing in the building, because a space, for instance, like Walmart would be very different if you're in a Walmart or if you're in movie theaters within that space. So there's different occupancies for different kinds of structures, and you figure how much space you have per person based on that occupancy type. So we did a whole lot of math, and my head hurt greatly back in the day yesterday. But we really touched every space in the building that holds you. And we looked at it from a couple of aspects. Okay, so a committee room in a committee room size space in a normal building in, say, a business occupancy would be space for about 1 person. Think about it, that's usually about the size of an office. But when we're talking about assembly space, we look at it from a little bit of a different standpoint. We took what the ASHRAE number was for that space, and we fully understand that we're not fully adopting that standard. And we took how many square feet per person could be in that space, and we looked at it and made kind of a judgment call. Is that reasonable? For instance, the Sergeant at Arms office by square footage can hold 19 people. We all know that is wholly unreasonable. So then you start looking at something that's required by the fire code called a seating plan. Well, you know, how many people sit in that office? There's 3 people there. So we figure, well, okay, so 3 people there, and, you know, 3 people visiting them to do business, and then maybe 1 sitting in the window. Well, 6, 7, that seems about right. And that was the number we assigned into that, was 6.
And 1 getting lunch.
Sure. So when we came across rooms that did not seem reasonable, we tried to apply a reasonableness factor to those rooms. Some of them have been done in the past. So if you've ever seen this hanging in the Sergeant at Arms office, there are rooms that have been studied within the state house in the past, and occupancy levels have been assigned to them. The House chamber of 350 people, the Senate chamber of 50 on the floor and 25 in the balcony, the cafeteria of 206. And those have all been done in the past, and those where we had those numbers, we applied those numbers into what we came up with. When we actually started looking real hard at the committee rooms, we applied the button seat rule. And that's, if you have seats in a room, then we want people in the seats, and then we're full. One of the challenges in our committee rooms is that all the doors open to the inside. So if you pack standing room people in that committee room, now all of a sudden you can't get the door open to get out, and can't get the door open to get in. Creates a challenge. Happened in Senate Judiciary a couple of sessions ago, where a young lady passed out behind Senator Benning, and it took a second to get things unstuck to get that person out and revived.
Just to clarify, it was not anything Senator Benning had said.
We also looked at the rooms that we've converted. So 9, 10, 11, and 24 this room. And where this room, I think if you do strictly on square footage, is an obscene amount of people can fit in here. We're like, that doesn't really seem too reasonable. So we matched this room with room 11 because the square footages are pretty close. And we went with that reduced capacity that we've put in place over there now, considering all of the electronics and the other alterations to the room. So, when I talk about the button seat rule, that is actually, there's a term for it. It's seating plan. The business calls it what we call it, but that is referenced in a specific section of the fire code, and it mandates that assembly occupancies have seating plans for things. So we tried to get this reasonableness going. And once we did that, we came up with a number that kind of surprised us, quite frankly. I'm not comfortable really releasing that number right now, because what we're doing now is we've taken all those numbers, and Stan, our Deputy State Fire Marshal, is going to hand them to someone else in the office that has not done any work in the State House, and have them put a fresh set of eyes on it, and to make sure that we didn't miss anything. Because if there's one thing the fire code and life safety code is complicated. And we want to make sure that we didn't really miss the boat on any of the numbers we came up with. But because that number is so large, quite frankly, if we put that many people in here, it would greatly concern me as far as being able to get everyone out or moved around. And it brings to mind another aspect of this. And when we've had large committee hearings and public hearings and things like that, oftentimes I've brought our Deputy State Fire Marshal in to work with us, because it gives a kind of a neutral set of eyes, because there's another factor that goes into whether you're full or not, and that's if you can move through the building safely. So when we pack the downstairs hallway so bad that the Sergeant at Arms can't get out of the room, well, that space in the building's full. So the other part about calculating building occupancy is things like hallways don't factor into it. Even though we often have people assembling in the hallways, they are not factored into calculating the capacity, because they're intended to be a transient space where someone moves from one point to the other and you're not hanging out in the hallways. So that said, we took that big number that we came up with, and then the Sergeant at Arms and I sat down and started kind of noodling through how we use this. How would we actually operationalize this number? And the first thing we said was, well, maybe we really don't need to get up to that big number. I mean, really, for the comfort of the building, because it takes into account things like the mezzanine, based on square footage alone, is rated for 160 something people. And we know that 160 something people don't really need to be in the mezzanine for all the health and safety. So if we came down to a lower number and we called this our day-to-day operational, this would presume that we're utilizing the committee rooms. We have people in the committee rooms. They're full in these rooms, 9, 10, 11, cafeteria, the chambers are in use and fairly full. We're assuming that every space in the building is being not necessarily taxed, but challenged, that we're full. It's a big day. That we would come to this capacity number one and say that, I think we're full. The other factor to think about with this is that in the fire code, it calls for crowd managers for large occupancies. This only truthfully applies over 1,000 people, but we try to use that as a really good best practice for what we're doing. And that calls for a person for every 250 that you have in the assembly or in the crowd. So when we think about how the things we have to do to evacuate the building, it takes people. We run our emergency plans and procedures for the building in accordance with we basically copy everything that's done in all the other state buildings in the complex. But we have an impaired persons evacuation that deals with physical, sight, speech, hearing, and cognitive disabilities, to where we have a plan in place for that. Well, that takes somebody to implement that plan within the building. So the more people we have, the more crowd managers, if you will, we have to have. We typically use the Capitol Police, doorkeeper, sergeant, and armed staff for those people. There's a lot of things to weigh out when you start looking at making this building capacity. So that was capacity one. That was meaning we're fully operational, everything's going on. And then we came up with another capacity number two that would be for something like an event where, if we have a large public hearing, we're expecting a large crowd, we close off committee rooms. We tend to lock the committee rooms up so none of your materials as legislators are tampered with in there. So those spaces now become unavailable to us. And as we take those spaces away, you also take away the capacity that came with those spaces. So where we may have 50 people that we assign as a capacity for this room, if this room is set as a committee room, well, then during those events, that 50 people come out of that mix. And we came up with another number that's lower than capacity one. And it would be my recommendation that we adopt those numbers when we make sure they're right and see how they do. Ultimately, and this comes back to that, if you can't move successfully from one place to the other, but the space is full. A lot of this is going to come back to at that moment management as far as the crowds go. I was not here for civil unions, but I've been here for a couple of hearings. I was like, man, I sure hope I don't have to get from here to there. It would be quite the wrestling match to get there. So that's what we've come up with. I expect that I'll have those numbers back and ready for prime time, hopefully next week. Certainly we can send them out in the interim if I get them back from fire safety. But I think we're in a good place because, quite frankly, I don't know capacity-wise that we would actually reach true fire code capacity. I hope y'all are not as confused as I am. I will say this, every time that I take a walk through the fire code, I learn something new. It is an extremely complex and interrelated document, and it is it's sometimes challenging.
Questions? Eric and then Butch.
So one of the challenges I guess you face is that there are 180 reserved seats in two places. So if the House and the Senate are on the floor, the rooms are vacant, but you can't necessarily count that as capacity. You always have this 180 moving around. and
True.
double booking, basically.
Absolutely.
Well, 180 plus staff, because we have our lawyers, our legal staff, and joint fiscal. When we're in session, they're here with us. So you can add on another 30 people to that.
Right.
And the other factor of this is if we ever get a percentage of recommendation. So if we get a recommendation to, hey, we really think because of whatever the situation is, that you may want to reduce your occupancy by 50%. Out of either of those two numbers, that capacity one and capacity two that I referenced, we feel like that we can reduce by 50% and still actually accommodate members, staff, and a good slug of the public.
Butch
Thank
and
you.
Joe.
Chief, you've given us two scenarios, for two different capacity limits. And I'm thinking that those are for normal times, not for the times we're in now. So when you and the Sergeant at Arms start talking about getting back to us, we talked earlier about limiting some activities of groups of public coming into the building for different things. Will you be factoring in a comfort level of the people that are working in the building? In other words, will you be factoring in, well, we can't, even though the card room takes X number of people, but people can't move around. People won't be comfortable with that particular spot in the building, filled up with people all the time.
I think so. And specifically to the card room, we looked at that room, and even when we were doing the code capacity, we reduced that number to and really said that those displays or the gatherings really need to be tucked into that nook and not out in the middle of the pathways. And I think
So I'm thinking no more like the displays in the nook, but then you've got people crowding in. And also like the cafeteria, there's a sign up there now for a fairly large cafeteria, the capacity of that room, but would members be comfortable with that room as it sometimes fills up when there are people in the building, way over whatever your thoughts are? If you can, in a fanny in the seat rule there, is problematic because now you can't feed the people that are working in the building.
I definitely think it's going to be a challenge to strike the balance. And I think that's where it becomes important to, in the last little line of my memorandum is that, in my mind, the best case scenario is to authorize the Sergeant at Arms to make those managerial changes. And I think there's going to be, there should be some direction that says, hey, we understand that this is the capacity, but we want to start with 60% or 80% or 50%. And then there needs to be somewhat of a lie, this word that comes to mind, but it's probably not the right word, but there needs to be an easy pathway to adjust that number up and down just a hair until we figure it out, quite frankly. And I know that the number that we came up with for the code capacity scared me. I'm like, man, I don't ever want to see that many people. It's a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, Janet, and then Joe, and then Stephen.
So Representative Shaw, are you talking about people's comfortableness regarding COVID or the times of things that may have happened?
The times we're in today, not times that we might be in a few years, because the building capacity, unless you change the size of the building, is also going to stay pretty much the same. But just the comfort piece now for the people that are working in the building, what do they feel comfortable with? That's going to be a hard guess, but
I still,
Yeah.
I question whether you are talking about like sitting on top of one another because you don't want to be so close to one another, or talking about security in general.
talking about movement capacity, so members can move around the building
I see.
without having to have an armed guard to get from one end to the other.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Joe and then Stephen.
First a comment, then two questions.
And you're going to have to speak
Yeah,
up.
Joe, you can speak up.
I cannot think of anything more uncomfortable for legislators in the building than to be deprived of the coffee line in the morning. But in your calculating, I have two questions. Doors opening inwards as opposed to outwards, is that taken into the calculation mix? Because you've defined this entire process built on a foundation of how do you evacuate the building and how successful you are. So is the shape of the doors part of that mix?
Absolutely. And that is a chief challenge to evacuation in this building. Okay, is the way the doors have to operate.
You also said that you ideally should have one person for every 250 people to organize and manage evacuation. I don't know what your ultimate number is going to be, but I have to assume you're contemplating, do I have enough staff available to meet that expectation?
So always contemplating that. I think that there are factors in this particular building, including the impaired persons evacuation process that we have to run, that impact it more than the 1 to 250 ratio. 1 to 250 ratio is geared off of a mass occupancy like a football stadium, that type of assembly occupancy. But, you know, for us here, there's a lot that goes on in an evacuation that takes human power. And I sure would like to have a few more. That's a whole nother discussion. I would not want to get into necessarily the details of everything we do on those cases till perhaps later.
Well, let's just choose a number out of thin air. I'm not locking anybody into it, but say building capacity was determined to be 2,000 people. You have full occupancy, so you have to anticipate 8 individuals to properly manage crowd elimination from the building. You've also got the potential for 109 and 133 State Street space being occupied by legislators. Am I safe in assuming at present you don't have 8 plus whatever staff at your disposal at any one given time to manage that?
That would be correct.
Janet.
Well, we augment and where our Capitol Police are the experts. And, you know, a lot of people that we might tag as helping us with evacuation or staff, you know, depending on what situation we would have in the State House, until you experience that, you don't know how you would react. We're not trained as our Capitol Police are. So I just want to point that out, that we do augment some things with Sergeant at Arms staff and also with other willing staff in the building, but it does have its limitations.
When we've had the evacuations for fire drills, I know that some committees have one delegate person, or there could be a delegate in that hallway. And quite often there are legislators, because in their real life world, they may be an EMT, they may be a retired police officer, firefighter, so they have the skills and the training. So I know we've looked at our colleagues to help fill that role.
We lean heavily right now on committee staff to take care of y'all. And then we have staff within the building that we rely on, trying to maintain as close as we can to their day-to-day lines of authority, because it makes it easier. For instance, Mike Brady behind me is, you know, responsible for a chunk of Ledge Council when we're in session, and, you know, to account for them and make sure that, you know, they're in a good place and where they're supposed to be. Some of the bigger challenges that we do have are, for instance, farmers' night. There's sometimes in farmers' night, there's 400 or 500 people here to see the symphony or the army band, or those kind of things. And we don't have all those extra people that we tend to rely on during the daytime.
Assume that means you've trained Alice to evacuate the room.
Absolutely.
She has a
Not me.
t-shirt.
John and I are, and Allison and John are.
She goes first.
I do. John and then Alice.
Do I have it correct? The two scenarios for building occupancy you describe are legislatures here working normal day as opposed to a special like hearing at night. Is that right?
Generally, yes, sir. That's kind of where we're starting.
So it seems like there's a piece missing though, because there's a drastic shift in the building when the it seems like you need a third one, because when the committees are working in the House, for example, all those rooms are full and the House chamber is almost totally empty. If you're counting that space as full occupancy, it makes no sense. And then it flips. We go into when we convene, all the committee rooms are almost empty
Right.
and the chamber's full. You got this big, it just seems like and the same thing happens in the Senate, obviously.
So that is actually accounted for.
It seems like you need a third one is what I'm saying.
So you've got fire code, which if you will, is here. And we're setting that capacity one lower because of that exact fact that we know that one chunk or the other is going to be dramatically under occupied. And then when we go to that second lower level is when we know that the committees are out, committee rooms are out, these larger assembly rooms this year are out. And we're really focused on cafeteria, chamber, that type of operation. And again, I'm not saying it's a perfect measurement. I'm just saying I think it's a good place to start and see how it functions. In order to do this, we still have to measure the people that are in the building. And we do not have all of that equipment put in. We don't even have all that equipment authorized yet. So we're not even in a place where we can actually measure the occupancy of the building truthfully yet.
We're talking people counters.
And that was the other piece I was going to again bring up is that people counters sound like a great option, except we need a way to figure out who's coming and going. The example I've used before is if we're using other buildings for some of the caucuses, if there's a caucus meeting and 50 legislators leave, it'll look like you have 50 open spaces because 50 people left, but they're coming back as soon as we convene. So I'm not sure just a simple people counter is going to give you reliable numbers.
So these do have the ability to differentiate.
If we have our cards, though, right?
Well, actually, it's a lanyard that you wear that tells the people counter to ignore you. But we think that we've set these numbers, these draft numbers, if you will, at a point where we can, that we will not exclude members, staff, and the public from that. And again, I will tell you that it's going to take a little trial and error as we go forward.
Allison and then Stephen.
I was just going to say what Janet had said, which is we can augment with trained people, which I thought we did. So I just was.
Stephen.
Great. Chief Rome, thank you for your work. It's very complicated, and I sort of know a lot of what you went through. Can I be heard okay?
Ask Karen. Karen, can you hear him?
Can you hear
Yeah.
me okay, Karen?
Well, the mics are very sensitive.
Thank you. Well, a couple things. We were talking a little earlier about the in-between calculation of the present day for kind of quasi-COVID time and trying to factor that in. And what I mean by that is we're in a situation or where we are today is we're in a mixed hybrid situation where we have many people vaccinated, but then we also have others that, for whatever reason, are not vaccinated. And we also have immunocompromised folks that will be here in the short term over the next 9 to 12 months. And so I guess saying all that, it just means like, it seems like it might be pragmatic to have different numbers based on what you end up developing and then adjusting. One of the phrases that comes to my mind for your team is you're going to be actively managing the situation on an ongoing basis, which is, which is really important because I think that's part and parcel of how you work together with Division of Fire Safety and all the different multiple factors that you're putting together and trying to figure out what might not be a simple answer. But if you're actively managing the use of the State House in these different scenarios, then that's a very favorable thing and very important thing. And then just one other thing that I was thinking about was I've been here for events that are maybe not a farmer's night and they're maybe not the legislature. They're quote, a special event, maybe a conference, a big activity where people use maybe the Senate and House chambers for meetings as well as the committee rooms. And it's kind of like an in-between situation where we're not really the normal operations, but yet we are potentially filling up a lot of the spaces in ways that maybe defy sort of easy calculation, but could be a great number of people. And but I guess I just wanted to, I've been to like a Vermont Council on Rural Development meeting, and they're very, very large, very exciting, dynamic events and so on. And but they're very different than a farmer's night. So I guess those are more just comments, but I definitely feel where you're coming from about how complicated it is.
So I think the term active management is a great distillation of, I guess, what I'm looking at. And, you know, for that to happen, at least it's my opinion, for that to happen, somebody's got to authorize her to do it, or, you know, or designate or whomever it's going to be. I mean, I think the best solution is the sergeant at arms. It tends to make sense to me. I do think in the situations that you're referring to where we have those type events going on, I think that's where the room capacities are going to drive the bus more than the total building capacity. I think building capacity may give us a good overall concept of how full we are, but I think your room capacities are going to be the drivers in those particular situations. I would also take the opportunity of what you've mentioned to, you know, it's definitely not a single input situation, because I think you're going to see something about managing capacity, you know, with another layer of, well, are we going to recommend masking, or are we going to do, there's something that came out today from CDC, I haven't had a chance to read it, but, you know, what do all these things, inputs, what do they all come out to be when at the kind of the end of the day?
So Janet, then Joe, and then I want to wrap this up because we've got more on the agenda too.
Yeah. So I just want to make it clear so if decisions are made up to the sergeant at arms, and it's important that, you know, the State House is open to anyone. So my big comment would be content neutral. We wouldn't be saying, okay, we've got this one group coming in, so today we're changing the capacity numbers, or that's not where we're going to go. That's not what any decisions would be made, not in a scenario like that. I just want to make that clear. We'd like to set some guidelines of when we have the ability that something's going on or the numbers changed or whatever, as far as COVID, that we would be able to do that. And we would refer to other people as well, but I just want to make that clear. we wouldn't be changing capacity numbers based on what's going on here legislatively in the building.
Joe?
I'm thinking of an air traffic controller and noting the difference between the person in the tower, the captain of the aircraft that's about to take off. I don't know how the sergeant at arms is going to become an air traffic controller without having a head count capability. And having that head count capability means literally monitoring either the entryways or the committee rooms in such a fashion that there is an expected number that at some point has been exceeded. But I'm nervous going down the road of trying to instill that into the sergeant at arms, because then there's an enforcement question. But it does identify, if you come up with a number of expected people in the building and expected butts in the seat in committee rooms, as you've said, that there has to be coordination between the sergeant at arms and the committee chairs as to what's happening in those individual locations. And that probably ought to be part and parcel of our recommendations to the Joint Legislative Management Committee, that once numbers have been identified, that training and coordination take place between the sergeant at arms and the committee chairs themselves.
I agree. I just pulled up our current dashboard for the building. So once we round out our perimeter with these counters, we are able to monitor those numbers live as we go. Committee rooms, I definitely think are going to be heavy on the chair to manage those.
The chair is going to be doing everything except trying to figure out how to do legislation.
Yeah, and can I just tag on to that, Alice? We cannot, the chair's job is truly active listening and managing the committee and the witness. I just, this is where we have clerks, we have vice chairs, we have other people whose jobs those could be. The chair's job is really so involved and so intense that I do not feel it's appropriate to be asking the chair to be monitoring the number of the people in the room or anything to do with the capacity issues or the issues. And the one thing I would tag onto as we move through this next year is we have what Butch brought up earlier, which is what if people feel comfortable with. That's going to be different with everybody. Everybody's going to feel differently about how they feel comfortable. And I think it's up to every individual to manage themselves too. I mean, if you're not comfortable in a space with too many people, you can remove yourself, or you can you have to also do a little bit of your own self-management physically, I think now. Well, no, all of us do. I mean, I'm going to Minnesota and oh my gosh, it's like COVID never happened. You're all packed into these small spaces. Yes, you have a mask on, but so what? I mean, it's all of a sudden it's back to normal in a very aggressive way. I think here we're kind of transitioning back to normal through this capacity issue. And what's interesting to me about this capacity discussion is I always thought that we were number 2 in terms of most visited sites next to Ben and Jerry's. So if we had no ability to count that, how did we know that?
We have
I just
done this primarily during the tourist season, not during your season.
So do you keep an
So
active count of
we do.
visitors when?
Much more during the tourist season, we can
Got it.
monitor that. But during your season,
We're different.
no way.
Yeah, no, it's too hard. It's
And then we extrapolate.
got it.
So let's focus in a little bit on our recommend. So what I'm hearing is, do we put in our recommendations that there should be a building capacity number? Or do we recommend that we recommend an authorization or some entity to authorize an active management scenario? And then that active management scenario would entail capacity 1, which is used on a day-to-day basis, particularly when we're in session. Another day-to-day basis. When we're not in session, it's a tourist season, and then events. We don't specifically give building capacity numbers, but we allow a management of those different scenarios. So can we quickly have a quick discussion on that so that at least Michael knows a little bit what our recommendations might be to start talking about it when we go through our report? Allison?
I would support active management because I have faith that between the chief and our sergeant at arms, they can manage this effectively. I worry if we set a number, either for capacity 1 or capacity 2, that we're going to have a lot of people who are going to be micromanaging that number. I worry that we're going to have a lot of sort of eyes thinking they know. Do you know what I mean? I don't want to name it, but
I think we'll have more problems like that. I think if we, as a group or in the report that we set a capacity number, it's much easier to manage if we have the different levels of the capacity number. Otherwise,
You're right back where you
we're right
are.
back where we started from. And then I feel like it's going to put me in a position where, whoa, building is getting way too complicated.
and
way
it puts
too
it on you.
full. And then I'm judging that, oh, we've got this hearing going on and I'm going to stop it. We got to stop this. We got to close the door. There's too many people in here.
But you don't have any backup to that if you don't have.
Well,
So clarify, active management for you puts it too much on you and the chief.
I think so.
Okay.
I think you need to have a more set rules. And I understand, Senator Benning, what you're saying, about the chairs, but it is the chair's room. And you're right, Alice, that I think someone else within the committee can manage that, but it's going to be up to the chairs to manage.
delegate.
Yeah, I mean, if it becomes a problem, then we could be called in to try to help facilitate it in the best way that we can. But that's my recommendation. I don't know, Chief, if you want to weigh in on that
I
difference.
have some strategies in mind that I think is going to help the committee room process quite a bit. I think it's going to make it a lot easier on y'all than I think most people are going to do the right thing. I hope. I will say that I worry about cementing those numbers in place. I don't think they should be changed willy-nilly, but I do think that, perhaps the recommendation might be that either the Joint Rules Committee or the Joint Legislative Management Committee can adopt a number or should adopt a number.
Or a range.
Or a range. Maybe you put it off on them.
So, but they're going to base that on our recommendation.
Absolutely.
So I know I don't want to put it on someone else if it's my responsibility.
So you're going to refine the numbers a little bit more. So let's revisit this next week, but at least give some direction. We will give some direction in our recommendation to the Joint Management Committee and Joint Rules that we really need to address the overall building capacities. And there are different scenarios. And those numbers within those scenarios. We just haven't found those numbers yet.
And the individual space capacity. So I know one of the challenges that the Sergeant at Arms deals with a lot is the main lobby right there, where, we have to get a can opener to get people out of there sometimes. And there should be some times where we say, all right, come on, let's go drink a cup somewhere. Don't see here.
I want to plant the seed that if you come up with a number for either the building or committee rooms, and then put a label on called active management, you have to have people beyond the sergeant at arms that are part of that system, much like an air traffic controller is communicating with the various pilots on the runway. And those pilots in turn are controlling what's going on inside their aircraft. You can't have committee members who are different from the chair trying to impose a number restriction, and the chair finding that their local high school has suddenly visited the building and the chair wants to bring them all in, and some vice chair is saying, no, you can't have them come in.
You kick them under the table.
Well, you've got to have a common understanding, and that common understanding has to come with training so that people are at least aware of the limitations, even if they decide to fudge it a little bit. But if you don't have that training, active management becomes a useless term, and all you've got is a number in the building.
I agree.
Okay, so I'm going to push this along. We've been talking about it for almost an hour. So next week you'll have more refined numbers and we'll have a better idea in terms of what we're going to make as a recommendation. Okay, so let's move on to legislative operations update, which is last week we talked with Mike Ferrant about his operation level that really needs to be accessible to legislators, needs to be in the building. And there was thought about using one of the rooms in the 30s as a possibility. We asked the questions about security of some of those confidential files. Do they have to be in a room that we place the people doing the work? Some of those files you don't access on a daily basis. Could they be stored somewhere else? And you were going to also look at the space a little bit closer to see how it all played out. So Mike, I'm turning it over to you. Give us an update on where we are this week.
Great. So the very specific, Mike Ferrant, Director of Legislative Operations. And the very specific question you asked me last week is how many file cabinets my staff needs. That number is 4. Four drawer file cabinets between Mariah and Charlene combined. We plan to migrate the personnel files, both staff and legislators, to Arlene Donovan, the new HR director. It's just much more appropriate for her to maintain those files. However, the work that Mariah does and Charlene and myself populate those files. So we populate the files, she secures them. We're going to work out more of how that looks over the summer and fall, but that'll be, I believe, the landing place for that issue come session. We've looked at the space in house agriculture and house corrections and institutions. I think both of those spaces provide enough room for 2 to 3 desks each room of workspace. So with the 4 of us, I think either having both rooms or having a hybrid configuration of staff somehow would work out. I am hesitant to promise this, but I've looked with Janet Miller down at 2 Aiken. If the HR director were to move to that location with her HR generalist who started this week, I can imagine a scenario where Mariah and Charlene, who do mainly administrative work during the day, having offices down in that space. I can see that working. There's cons to that. Supervision struggles to that. There's communication struggles to that. Oftentimes I've seen people come to get something or information from me. If I'm not at my desk, they look right beyond my desk to Mariah or Charlene, and that would be lost. It would be all on me if Peggy and I were up in house agriculture, for example. So we're looking at that and seeing, well, could that work? Could that not work? It's still very much up in the air right now. I think if Peggy and I co-located in house agriculture room now with possibly a workspace behind us, like a conference table or something to meet with staff. And then Charlene and Mariah maybe across the hall in house corrections and institutions with a workstation behind them. I think we could make that work, but then we're taking up 2 rooms. It seems like that's a lot to ask. I can feel Representative Bartholomew not liking that after he remarked that I had already taken 1 room last week, and then this week I'm taking 2. I promise I don't want more than I need. I think 4 people in house agriculture, 4 workstations, 4 work desks in there be really tight. Peggy and I talked a little bit today about some other configurations of things. If there was me, Mariah, and Charlene in that room, and Peggy stayed in the afternoon in Senate Judiciary after she after she finished up her work there. So we're actively talking about how we can make this work, where we can relocate so that our current space could be used for your coat room, lounge, whatever you please. And we're trying to think outside the box, and we're also picturing what it looks like in our heads in January as we go forward.
I think we're all trying to picture what it's going to look like in January.
I think it's going to be uncomfortable for everyone, no matter what you do. Everyone's going to have to sacrifice some space. Everyone's going to have to sacrifice some comfort. And how much of the efficiency do you sacrifice as you go forward with those other sacrifices? I think that's the real issue. That's what you really boil it down to, is everyone's going to be a little pinched and uncomfortable, but at what point do you lose efficiency? And what point do you lose effectiveness?
Questions, Joe?
That last scenario of Peggy staying in Senate Judiciary, has she had a chat about that with the chair of that committee?
Nope. Here she comes.
Hello.
I would just
Oh,
recommend, Peggy, that you might want to chat with that particular chair.
And I only bring it up not as official testimony. I bring it up to say we are actively daily talking about this and what we can do.
No, I appreciate it. I just.
Yeah.
It's important, if you're going to move in any different direction, that all the players involved ought to have some part of that conversation.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Questions? So I don't know what our recommend is going to be on this at all.
So just want to reaffirm that your ideal your ideal situation is not to move, but your ideal move situation would be take both the 30s rooms for your operation.
Ideally, yes. I think that creates the most effective solution for the legislature.
Janet?
So Mike, I know that when you go up there and you visualize how big a desk is, it might be good to have maybe Stephen, who's able to help us to take the measurements of the room and to look at some scenario that might see how many desks could comfortably fit or file cabinets. Would that be helpful to you, or?
Absolutely. And I heard that last week too, but then I thought Stephen said he wasn't going to be here. So the thought kind of just went out of my mind and I had to follow up.
I was in sunny Bar Harbor between the last meeting and today, so I'm happy to help.
I'm at sunny scout camp next week, so I won't.
Okay.
Oh, rainy scout camp. So.
Would that be a heavy lift for you, Stephen, to?
We can talk about it offline. I think it'll be feasible to support.
It's a tough thing to visualize because our current desks are they're wastes of space. They're enormous and they're just too much.
Right.
Wood, quite frankly. We settled into them because they were there, but I think moving those things way up there would reduce a lot of effective space. So I think I think more modern and sleek furniture it's the corrections made furniture. It's just really big balls. Would do better off in surplus than here.
Well, we'll see, David.
We'll see.
You want any comment on that?
I don't like the words modern and sleek. If you could go with something neutral. Let's call them neutral.
Neutral, efficient, effective.
Remember, it's not permanent. They are not permanent.
Right. This is not a permanent
This
solution.
is not permanent.
I know that. No,
Someone once
that's great comfort to me.
No, it's not permanent.
Someone once said that there's nothing more permanent than temporary.
Yeah, well, let's hope it's not even that. It's just-
I like that.
It seems that the rooms on that floor
Can you speak up?
it seems like the rooms in that floor are being considered more prime real estate than the rooms upstairs. Is there a way, or would it be effective to put one of the offices downstairs and the other upstairs in one of those three rooms?
I don't see an issue with that. I think anything like that is on the table.
Sorry, what's on the table?
If he split up, so he didn't use the two rooms across from each other on the 30s, used one of the rooms on the 30s and used the other, like Charlene and Mariah, up on the 4th floor. the 40s. So you don't take up those two empty committee rooms on the 30s, because those seem to be more prime real estate than the 40s. Because they're closer to the cafeteria, the well, the house.
It would make senators a lot more comfortable to have them on that floor than having us go all the way up to.
Oh, oichi
I
poichi.
mean, what he's saying is that Mike would be on the 30s, and then the two that don't interact with us as much on the
Can I ask
40s.
this question, because I don't know whether we've ever discussed it? If you're going to evacuate those two rooms as House committee rooms, is there something else we were planning on throwing in there that would negate
Lounge.
that?
We need a lounge.
Well, that
We
could
need lounge spaces.
be two rooms in the 40s for House members.
I see
Yeah,
you
3.
greeting me in the morning, up on the 4th floor. Lovely. Lovely.
Actually, there are 3 rooms.
So we have not talked about replacing the lounge too
Which
much.
we need to.
I think it's all interconnected. I think let's finish up with this one, and then I want to get into the lounge. I want to get into the bathroom.
So have you ruled out that all 4 of you could be in one of those rooms? Really? It's the big, I mean, without the
I
tables.
did the actual measurements with the architect, and I try not to rule anything out until I absolutely know, but when I go up there and I think about 4 people with 4 desks and 4 chairs, it's tight. There was, 11 people in there with, at one point. But you also weren't there 365 days a year. You weren't doing the administrative workload that we have to. You weren't serving 180 people and 80 staff. So we do need that kind of space. One of the things that we looked at and that we're still looking at, and I'm not going to commit to it right now, but something we were thinking about the last 2 days. So if Arlene and her administrative staff are down in 2 there are 2 empty offices with a conference room in between next to them on that bottom floor. So if you have the conference room with a big conference table and chairs around it, and then you have Mariah and Charlene in the 2 empty offices next to that. Mariah and Charlene, you could have that big conference room house all of the file cabinets that both offices needed. And that could be an administrative floor or area for the legislature to work. We could have Peggy and I up in House Agriculture as the operational component to my section. You could have a mini lounge across the hallway in House Corrections, and then another mini lounge, workstations, comfortable chairs, things like that for legislators on the 40s and on the 30s in those spaces. Other thoughts? So we're like I said, daily talking, thinking outside the box. How can we serve you best, but also not become ineffective to help?
So one thought, so you're still noodling this.
Always.
So another issue or thought or perception or concern that was voiced to me by another legislator this past week, and, talking about 9, 10, 11 in the lounge being committee rooms, and then we'd find space, either some of those committee rooms had been freed up for the lounge. And the members said to me, if you thought about safety. And I said, in what way? And the person said, well, if you have a lounge in the 40s, you're the furthest, you're way up there. And if people are working there in the evening,
Yes.
and they're
Yeah.
pretty vulnerable up there. They could be vulnerable. Has anyone asked that question about safety? And I said, we haven't. I said, I'll put that on the table.
And Alice Nitka and I are and John is often here quite late, but Alice and I are usually here the latest. And we close the building down at 12-ish, and sometimes Alice at 2. That is an interesting question, because that is a question, although I have never had fear in this building.
Because you were on this floor.
Because
way
I
up
was here, and it
might give you a different.
On the other hand, you can also quickly close the door. There are pluses too, that it's not as big with 2 doors. I don't know, John. What do you think? I mean, as long as John's in the building, I wouldn't worry too much. But you're right, it is a more vulnerable
At night,
idea.
it's locked, so there aren't strangers usually wandering around.
Well, as long as they haven't sort of stowed away in the building, which has happened.
Well, I think it could be more of a physical, psychological feel that here in this room, we're on the ground floor, well, see out, you have easier access. If you're up in the 40s, you're away from the whole building.
Alice,
So I don't know.
we could be here. At night, there's no committee here. So at night, people could be working around the table and it could be kind of an after hours lounge. I mean, there's no reason not to use this room at night.
Depends on what committee is here.
Well, it doesn't,
And I mean, that could be on the table too.
I think that might kind of be a nice solution, is to be able to have this swing, at least working here at the desks. Because there's no way to have files here. It's not like they're going to be keeping stuff so much here as they would in a normal committee.
But some folks need that desktop computer. Some folks may not have a laptop.
Oh, I see what you mean, and not use
and
their
they need a
laptop.
Desktop. So Butch,
So we have a great example of what could be sitting here now. Just simply slide this way and you've got a huge, fairly large, substantial table over there that could be utilized with some couple, 3 or 4 laptops that want to work in here late in.
so can I throw something out that's really going to confuse things? This is not a good setup for a legislative committee, for the chair to know what the committee's doing. You cannot see members. You're constantly going like this to see your members. So the table configuration in a U does not work well when you're going to be sitting in a committee, running a committee all day long. You have to be able in one fell swoop to see your members and see what's going on. It is really difficult. I keep moving back and forth to see who's interacting with whom, what their response is to the person testifying, what their response is to each other, and seeing your hand go up. It's really difficult in this format to do that. Senate might be a little different because you only have 5 people, but we've got 11 people in House committees. It's really difficult with the U shape. And I know it's effective for folks out there, but I think we also have to ask, what's the efficiency for us doing our legislative work? So that feeds in a little bit to a configuration in this room, because this is taking up a lot of room. So John and then Janet.
I was just gonna say the same thing. Hearing.
Yeah.
But not for committee. But if you're doing a more traditional committee room setup, it's gonna take a lot less square footage, which just reinforces the fact that you could have a couple of workstations over there for people to use after hours that have nothing to do with the committee that's assigned to the room.
Yeah.
So I agree, and I won't speak for Kevin, I don't think he's here, but if we decide to do it, let's keep all that in mind, because whether that means different hardware, or also if we're using these rooms all the way through December for interim meetings, that's gonna limit how much time it's gonna take to set all this up and to make it work. Because if, in fact, we would move, say, your committee chair desks down to the configuration that you're used to, I'm just saying, if we would, that takes movers, that takes a lot of time. It would, I won't speak for Kevin, but I would think we would need at least 2 months' time to facilitate.
Well, hopefully this committee won't be meeting then.
Yeah.
And hopefully it's temporary.
Yeah. Stephen?
Steve Fry, BGS Planning and Property Management. One thought I had, and I appreciate your feedback because it's great that we're here, so we know what it's like for you to be in this environment with the audio visual support and so on. I think one of the things that could be missing is simply just smaller table sizes that could be organized in a more curving manner that would allow you to see each other more easily and maybe still maintain the audio visual effectiveness. And I think there could be some layout options, but it might entail different furniture, and that is an expense. And
I mean, it's really important for members to interact with each other. It's really important in the committee process for that.
We're 11 today.
And it's difficult.
Really?
It's it's difficult to see people and see their expressions and see what's going on. And when you're running a committee and listening to people testify, you're constantly looking.
Just want to say that after hours, there's no more than a handful of people in the building. And if you are in need,
I can't hear you. Sorry.
after hours, there usually is no more than a handful of legislators working in such a way that they need to have a desktop and a desk. We have in the Senate 8 committee rooms with a desk and a desktop. You are welcome to use my committee room for as long as I'm chair of my committee to walk in and use that at any time you want. In a short-term fix to all of these problems, I would hate to lose this room as a large committee room if we are moving other committees out of their spaces in the expectation that we have to have rooms this big. Because there's just no way that we can keep this as a legislative lounge as it was traditionally used and not have a major impact on that decision. Been around that table too many times.
John?
I want to also point out that the people who work here after hours, often they're working on their own constituent work or newsletters or whatever, but there's also a lot of dialogue that happens between those people at night. And it's often,
Productive.
the ones here, but we happen to be Windsor County, so it's productive, just little conversations that happen. And those are, I feel, very valuable to the people who gather. So what I'm saying is we need a predictable place where people would go. Just finding a workstation, that's simple if you want to be by yourself. But the gathering, even if you're all working on something, it can be really valuable. It has been for me.
Me too.
And we are hearing from our colleagues that they don't want to lose a lounge. Now, that could be for folks who are coming in the morning, and that's where they're grounded in the morning for a little bit. It could be after their committee, they're waiting, they're carpooling, they come down to the lounge, they meet other legislators, how's your day, wait for their carpool people. It's used in different ways. And that's the one that concerns me. The nighttime thing, I think there's some flexibility there, but that ebb and flow of people coming in the morning, some folks come in the morning early and do their constituent work in the lounge because they're away from their committee, because they know they've got people coming into their committee room and they want to be able to be quiet. So
I'm not
It's at both times of the day.
not discounting the utility of the room, and I appreciate the camaraderie, things that get talked about in a group setting. We have to keep in mind, this is a temporary fix. And if we are literally moving a standing committee out of its location to take up this room for safety purposes or for comfort purposes, I would hate to lose a room this size and then have an expectation that somebody's going to have to go to 109 or 133.
but could this room be used, we haven't vetted this, but could this room be used as this committee room with the tables reconfigured a little differently? And a section with some ability for folks to, well, it's not going to work during the day. It's not going to work early.
No, I think you need a smaller place during the day because most of us are expected to be in committee, as you know. And so it's the between 6:30 and 9 really. Those are the crunch times for the
People
lounge.
come in at 7. There are
Yeah,
people that
6:30
come in
or
at
7.
6:30, 7, they come to the
I
lounge.
remember OB used to come in at like 5.
Folks who come in
But-
that early and come.
And then there are those of us who work from 6 to midnight. So I mean, it's we all work at different hours,
And
but it would
at noontime, there's a group that comes
Yes.
down here at noontime
12 to 1, it's packed often.
to do their work. Because the committee rooms are taken up for one reason or another. So the question is, if we don't do a portion of this room, because it wouldn't work, if you've got, say you've got say you got appropriation committee in here, they start working at 8 in the morning, 8:30, and they're working around the clock. So you won't be able to use this room. If you have GovOps and resources or whatever, they're working long hours. Unless you put a Senate committee room in here and use the Senate committee room with a lounge. Do do two Senate committee rooms in here.
How about the Marble Palace?
No, you can't. That ADA compliance you're working on as well. This room does not coordinate with that.
You're thinking of splitting it.
Yeah.
Stephen?
Just a minor comment, if, because of the high use, if this room is used as a committee space as an interim basis, if there was other furniture put in here and it was flexible, my guess is it might be challenging to rearrange said furniture because of all the technology that's that we're seeing in front of us, and it takes specialized people to set them up, and we
These
really
don't
don't.
move right now. They're bolted together.
Oh, yeah,
And
exactly.
that's the reason why.
Right. So that's probably an expectation not to have for this space is it can't be flexible.
Oh, we go round and round. And Mike, I think we're done with your section.
I'd love to get it.
Yeah, I think we're done. In the lounge, we're not gonna resolve it at this point. So keep thinking. The gender neutral bathroom, get an update on that, and then we'll move.
I have
Yep, I would ask that could Joe come up?
Come on up,
because
Joe.
Joe had worked with me on the gender single-use bathroom, which is the conference room outside of Mike Vaughn's desk. And Joe was kind enough to offer his services to come up and look at it. We really appreciate that, Joe. And I'll let him talk about it, but then at the same time, some of the limitations for buildings and general services is to have a contractor on board to get this job done with all their other work that they have to do in finding contractors. So I was able to reach out to a contractor that I knew may have some time, and this person has worked in the State House before. And so then decided to bring that person in along with Joe and discuss what might be feasible. And it gets a little more technical with the sewage and all that. So that's why I'd like Joe to take over. Go ahead, Joe, it's all yours.
It's all yours, Joe.
Joe Acha, Director of Design and Construction for Buildings and General Services. So the two projects, one being here at the State House versus looking into installation of a single-use restroom in the legislative lounge area. That is in the old section, State House, that butts the last renovation addition that was put onto the State House. There is a sewer line running out here in the loading dock area nearby. Exactly where it is, we don't know, but that's all fun of design and construction. It looks doable. We will need a permit to do this, so I would recommend an architect. I know of one.
What type of permit?
Fire safety.
Fire safety, okay.
Only because it's somewhat of a change of use, putting a restroom in there. I don't foresee any issues with that at all. It's just one of the things we have to jump through. And that will also help with laying that out. I don't have staff right now to tackle that. The room that we're looking at is larger than needed for an accessible restroom right now. I know the first time I looked at it with Janet, we thought, well, maybe do the accessible restroom and then maybe a closet. It'd be a bonus to have that instead of having the restroom having a window in it that looks out as the back entry that you have. But this is, and with the ductwork, the conduits, everything else in there, having a architect, mechanical engineer to really design this plumbing. Because I could not find where the vent stack is, the closest one. I know of one in the back corner, but that would be something that they would look at and make sure it's sized appropriately. Speaking with the contractor, they thought it was doable in the time frame being, as soon as possible, but definitely by the time you start your session. It may be some, because all the outside work would be completed, inside work of cosmetic stuff. They take a little bit. The items we're talking about are not long lead items, it's bonus, so it can be full on. And that's for the restroom here.
Allison,
I thought we had a gender neutral bathroom on the third floor.
that's the issue.
It's not-
Janet? talk
It's
about
not
this.
ADA compliant because it has a step.
It's not accessible.
Oh, gosh, I hadn't
It's
thought about, and that would,
accessible because it's up on the
got it,
floor when people are coming in.
got it, got it. And so the other one that is possible, of course, is the Marble Palace, which is a bathroom already, but it's not accessible either, except from the tunnel.
The one we have been using is on the mezzanine, which is kind of an office, private office space, and it's a little harder to direct people to get there. The former
You
director,
mean the one by David's office?
yes, yes. So we-
Particularly when we have a sign there that
Because that's right by the elevator.
Yeah.
It says no public available, no
But
public.
we could get rid of that sign.
Well, but it is within the public then is within a workspace. Right.
Oh, I see what
Yeah.
you mean, right.
And it's,
Got it.
it's hard to direct people. That's almost like, I will take you there, and that's what we want to get away from.
Got it.
Shouldn't have to take people there. We should just say, that by the coat room or some,
By a door that you enter the building.
yeah,
Right.
too.
And where the cloakroom may be temporarily anyway, which would make it easy.
Bigger issue is the public coming into the building needing an accessible bathroom. And they have to go up to the 40s to do that. And that's not accessible totally. Or they have to go into our legislative council workspace.
Got it.
And it's in a space where we have a sign that says public is not allowed.
Very well.
So that's the issue. So it's doable, but there's steps that need to be addressed. You need an architect, mechanical engineer, you need design documents, has to go through code, has to be permitted by fire safety. Chances are it could be done by the legislative session.
The bonus is that, different branch of government, you don't have to jump through all the hoops I have. to
Right,
do.
bulletin
They did everything.
3.5.
Yep. And so, but the design of it, is relatively quick. We have the documents that they can use and move forward with it. So it's just really the final layout of how that would the best work in. It won't take long.
Allison?
Did we look at, also, I mean, I'm sure you did look at this, but at our sick room, I mean, at our,
Infirmary.
what do we call it? Our infirmary. Couldn't we use the infirmary?
We did look at that too with the contractor and Joe, and our lactation room is there. We still felt like the conference room would be the easiest access for it.
Correct. Again, when you're looking at how to direct somebody, if ledge council doesn't move out, you're going through that door, hanging a left, going through the door, back through. It's not very convenient to find. It's doable.
Yeah.
There is sewer right in that location. But there's the configuration of it where which side that you enter. I would look at it from the entrance side, as you come into that area to the elevator lobby, right on the left-hand side of the door. It's very tight. I think it's complies with ADA standards, but there was very limited ability to move that door because of the fan coil unit that is there, and then also the fire alarm notification. So those items can be touched. It's a touchy system, and I'd rather not touch it.
Michael?
So this relates to timing. Are you gonna need a wastewater permit from DEC because you're gonna be connecting to the hookup?
We're already connected into the existing system. We are adding a restroom, but you're not adding any more load. You have the same load that you have now in the building.
How are you not adding flow by adding a new toilet?
Because the individual who's using that toilet is not using an existing toilet.
So would BTS be involved in looking at those final design documents?
We would,
Because
yes, we would still want to be the project manager on the job. and have an individual for that and oversee your architect and fire, just like we normally would, just facilitating speed.
So was that discussed when you two walked it, that there would be a project manager from BGS?
We talked about,
So where are we as a committee? Is that something we should recommend? I mean, how would something like this work in terms of authority from the Sergeant at Arms to move forward with a project like this? Would that have to be agreed to by the management committee, by rules?
I think it depends on what funding and what the
Okay.
the
So that's-
statute says
Yeah.
regarding who needs to sign off on it. And Catherine, is that correct?
I think that's correct. This is Captain Beth from the Joint Use Law. And the CRF funds that have been appropriated for the coronavirus relief, I have to think if this qualifies for that, but those go through JLNC.
So to bring the committee up to speed on that, in the appropriations budget, in the appropriations bill, there is 2.5 million from the CARES Act, not ARPA, but the CARES Act, for renovations to help the legislature address COVID-related issues. The requirement is that those projects need to be completed by December 31st. So if we want BGS to do the work, they have to go through Bulletin 3.5, which is a whole bidding process for contract, to go out for contract. Their contractors are busy. They wouldn't be able to find their own contractors. The bidding process would take a long time, and the project would not be done at the end of the year. If the Sergeant at Arms is the one going out for the contract, does not have to go through Bulletin 3.5 and use the contractors that have already looked at the space, and the project appears to be able to be done by December 31st. The 2.5 million to be expended needs to be approved by the Joint Management Committee, and I believe joint rules as well.
I don't remember that. Can I just clarify one thing, which is, you're right, I don't think we have to abide by, but we try to follow the guidelines that the executive branch uses. So it might be, there might be a way to expedite it. The Sergeant at Arms got a couple bids on it so you would want it, depending on how much it is, you want to follow some process that feels that is appropriate.
Right, so you would go out to bid, but you wouldn't be locked in to
Or you could go out and you could just get estimates. It depends on how big the project is. And I don't have a sense. We're talking about so many different projects, so I don't. It depends on the total dollar that that's what triggers the bidding process as well for the executive branch.
Michael?
You could probably use the simplified bid process, because you only need to get 3 estimates for cost of it. So you already basically have one.
So that's a moving piece here
And an opportunity.
and for that. And there's another moving piece with 2 Aiken, because we have the same issue. If there were conversations last week of moving the HR person into 2 Aiken. And Catherine, did you go over? I know Arlene went over, you went over, and Catherine, did you go over, went over and looked at the first floor space? The whole building space. What I'm understanding, there's interest in where David Sheets' office used to be, which is as you go in, it's the office right there on the right.
That lovely corner
For
office.
our
It's absolutely beautiful.
It is beautiful.
So there's some upgrades there that we needed. I'll go to Janet and give us an update on what's happening there.
Yep, so at the same time, the realization is in the one Baldwin where JFO is, they need space. That's where the HR folks are right now. So they went to look at the space. They like the space. We think we can accommodate them in a timely manner by like sprucing it up cosmetically. And once again, Joe had his red cape on and he came in and helped us figure it out. Once again, with the contractor that we had who thinks they might have time to do it. It's not correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, it doesn't seem like a huge project to get this part ready.
That's correct. It's mainly cosmetic. It's painting, carpet, and changing a few light fixtures. There was talk of adding a door that enters sort of what was David's suite. He has an open area with an office on the left and right-hand side. But the opening to that is not wide enough to comply with ADA standards when you put a door in. So lacking that, the discussion then moved to whether or not we could modify the existing doors to the offices to put in a lock. And that certainly can be done to
Put in a what?
a lock,
A lock.
lock set, so that they can lock the door all the time behind them. Easy way of doing it is a deadbolt into the period of door that's there. There was also talk of maybe adding card readers to it, so you could actually see who goes into those.
Adding a what?
Card readers, card swipes.
What we have.
Badge.
Right. Had access. So that can be done also. Because of the style of the door, it's a thinner door, we could not use the existing doors. Newer doors, thicker doors would be required. But otherwise, adding the paint is easy. Adding the carpet's relatively easy. The lighting, although the building still has knob and tube, in both those offices, or all three of them, have wire mold, which is a wireway that newer wires have been run into. So I'm not concerned with changing out the light fixtures. That can be, as readily as you can get new light fixtures, they can be installed.
Great. Are there any code issues that we have to be careful with?
No, because we're not changing any of the walls, relocating doors, adding them or subtracting them. It's just cosmetics.
And Madam Chair, that same issue is depending on how we want to pay for it. And from my perspective, and to get them on their way in a place to be, even if we did other renovations over at 2 Aiken, we still thought they could still be there in with minimal change, depending on what we do.
Correct. There would be noise, but if you're just doing overhauling all the electrical, the rest of the building could be done. They would probably have to move out a little bit if we were going to change all the electrical in those 3 rooms. But a lot of the electrical from that, except for the lighting, would be fed from the floor down below, which is relatively easy.
On that note, that bringing Mike Ferrant in today with the conversation of moving a couple of his folks over to that 2 Aiken. I talked to Mike about it, in that if we decide to do some renovations with the electric, that might be limited as to when they could go in there, because, say we're right next to the conference room, Joe, that when we were talking about those outlets that need to be pulled,
Right.
and then it's got a drop ceiling. So if you're fixing the drop ceiling, then you might want to go up to the 2nd floor. One thing leads to another. And so those are questions.
Ceilings and that.
So if we wanted to use the 2.5 million for part of the 2 Aiken, it sounds like it's getting into wiring more than that floor. It could be, would there be time with the contractor, would they be able to get it done by the end of December for that?
And Joe, we weren't sure of what, we talked about that. They didn't know the whole scope of all the work, right? Right now they're
That's correct.
focusing
We
on.
had a general contractor in there, not an electrical contractor. The electrical contractor that we talked about is capable of doing a design build, so that they can come in. So we're not hiring an electrical engineer to do it. They have in-house and the license to do that. They can lay it out. Main panels are already there on all 4 floors, basement, all the way to the 4th floor. And so it's coming off of those areas that you need. The hard part is the 2nd floor. And then 1st floor, it's the ceiling, the lights. So there's a lot of old wire mold that run along baseboard, up walls, stuff like that. My guess is you would want to take that out. If I was going to go to a light fixture like this to get power to it, I'd probably have to have anywhere between 2 and 4 holes, 2 in the wall, 2 in the ceiling to get power there. That's flat. A lot of the ceilings over there are exposed plaster. So that means you got to patch that. There are some areas that have suspended ceilings. Do you want to keep the suspended ceilings or go a little bit further? So as that whole thing starts to grow,
Big
the
project.
project grows. And then what you notice now when you walk through there also, because there's no furniture that hides the floors, you do notice that. And Janet had mentioned that, what about the floors? It's structurally sound. It's an old wooden building that had a lot of file cabinets in it at one point in time, and the floor is too small.
And Joe, would you suggest, and one of the things that we could do, and I'm not sure what pot of money that could fall into, was hire a mechanical engineer to look at the structural issue? Should that be done first?
If you were wanting to go through and evaluate, try and level all the floors, yes, structural engineer would be needed.
Some of the floors over there are a little wonky, as you say, safe. You might.
They're safe. By walking through now without furniture, there are some trip hazards. There are others, when we were in there, I can think of one or two spots in the hall where you can feel yourself as you're walking, you're going up and then you're pitching down on the other side. But otherwise, most of them, they were, I was sat there for 38 years.
That's why they were uneven.
Problem. So to move somebody in there on a temporary basis, make sure that can be done relatively easy. But you start looking at everything else, where do you want to stop? For the electrical, whether or not, a decision right now would have to be made if I'm redoing all the electrical, is that I can wire it to have a fan coil unit so that you could have a hot water and cold water system in there blowing similar to what's blowing in the rooms here, or you could put in a window air conditioner. The power that I'm running to that is basically going to be the same. There can be an outlet or a junction box there for the future.
Awesome. So it strikes me that given that we may be looking at the green lady or whatever you want to call it. I love the pink and the green lady. Seems so summery. What? Green Hornet. Oh, the Green Hornet. The Green Hornet. That's not bad either. So the Green Hornet, if the Green Hornet or the Green Lady is going to be a long-term possible space, totally renovated, does it make, as part of our long-term expansion of and looking at both the Pink Lady and the Green Hornet as a part of our intimate complex of legislative services and legislative life, if we're going to incorporate that and really renovate it seriously to suit either Ledge Council or JFO, whoever might be there, does it make any sense to do additional spend any money on it other than the making it functional for the people who are going to use it for 1 or 2 years?
If you were only going to do it on a temporary basis, yeah, I wouldn't start going throughout the whole building. But what typically can happen is you move somebody in temporarily and you have the rest of that space vacant. And so then you temporarily move somebody else. I mean, I started as a summer temp and I'm no longer there. Thank you. But that happens. And then that's harder because then you'd have to temporarily move them out.
Got it.
We do that as a business, renovating in and around people. But if you're going to level the floors and restore the ceiling, get rid of the suspended ceilings, restore the plaster, nobody in the building.
Well, yeah, my other thought is that if we did the whole first floor or the whole ground floor as for temporary use, it also is overflow space. It's overflow for meetings. It could be overflow for if Mike, is it Mariah and Charlene that you were thinking about?
That's right.
Yeah, if Mariah and Charlene were there, it might be a place for other temporary, as we live in this temporary world until we have, finished expansion. Might it be useful to then renovate that whole first floor?
But then you have to know what you're doing with the whole building, in a way.
Yeah, I agree.
When you first do those first renovations, you need to know what you're gonna do with that building ultimately.
Right.
And I think
Janet?
we don't
Don't know.
want to also invest in something that's fairly costly and then have to take it out.
Yeah.
We were looking for projects that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, we were kind of considering projects that could be done now before the end of December and not negate any other ideas for that building.
Got it.
Because of the structural walls that are there, and yes, you can move them, but then you're talking beams and everything else. If you took it as is and redid the first floor electrical, the future of that electrical that's there is going to remain. You might need something over here for a copy or something like that, but as a whole, you're not wasting your money on it. Good.
So is this something that the committee wants to make a recommendation to joint management committee? Because the 2.5 million would be used for this. And that would need approval by the joint management committee. And I believe also joint rules. But I'm not
Oh,
sure.
really?
The language of the
So,
renovations.
but the 2.5 should cover the bathroom and that renovation.
But it has to be authorized.
Right, got it. But it could cover a bunch of projects.
Catherine,
2.5 is also covering Kevin,
his IT.
his IT stuff, so if you're going to recommend that, I would encourage, that's really pressing you, that's clearly, I think, it seems like it's a go, I don't know, decide exactly how many committees and what they're doing, but that might be helpful for him also to get.
We have the IT, we have the gender neutral bathroom, and then the electrical work, be it either for just HR to move into that space or that first floor of 2.8 for the 2.5 million.
I think the HR piece is just basic. It doesn't need new electrics for that.
Just the door.
The door paint and.
I mean, it's pretty much cosmetic. It's not a huge project. so.
Right, that's pretty.
So then the question is, do you use this time to upgrade the electrical in the first floor? Or do you wait until we figure out what's really going to be used for the whole building?
Yeah. So just question, is Arlene willing to consider, she's happy with consider, okay.
But
So we're a long way from where we were last Tuesday with HR. And so I think probably the prudent thing to do right now, as things roll out, is to do what's doable by December, whatever the date is, and not worry about rewiring the whole first floor right now. And especially, it sounds like they will not need any electrical renovation per se in that space.
Carpet paint,
Carpet paint
And I
or
think,
something, and they see,
new light fixtures, but otherwise.
see cap.
You do have these funds that you could use by December, if you need to rewire the building for whoever's in there, I guess I might encourage you to
Yeah.
use the funds while you have them.
Right, while we have them.
Do it no matter what, if so it's saying,
But yeah, but we only have $2.5 million.
I know.
I know, but if you,
My estimate.
if you can do it, Butch, if we
Yeah.
can do it and these others, all under 2.5, I would think we'd be fools not to upgrade if we still have that money.
is that an undertaking that we want to have our sergeant at arms go out for and contract for?
Those three things.
Well, the whole, I'm thinking of 2 Aiken doing the whole rewiring in that building.
Yeah.
We want to have a project like that where our sergeant at arms is responsible for that with a project manager from BGS. Because rewiring that whole building of 2 Aiken, you cannot do it through BGS and the contractors because the time isn't there to get the project done to qualify for the federal dollars.
I think it, excuse me, Madam Chair, but Joe, I think it, as we talk to this contractor, if he or she was going to do the whole first floor cosmetically and arrange to have an electrician come in to work on the electric, they could take the project, right, and work with your project manager.
They could, absolutely. But do you want to just do the first floor? And do we
That's-
want to remove, if we're going to do all the electrical, we're removing all the old wire mold And what do we do with the ceilings?
Right, and that was the question that we didn't want to go forth until we talked to all of you to even consider getting estimates on that
Because
project.
we have no clue what the cost of that.
Right, right.
This-
Can we get a bid?
This is something that you can't bid without bid documents.
Right.
So,
So you need the
you know,
documents.
I mean, we're talking time that we just don't have. And the more we do, the more it snowballs and snowballs and snowballs and snowballs. And there's
If that's what you want to do, to do
Yeah.
the electrical on the first floor, just the electrical.
Yeah.
Isn't bad. But if I'm running new wiring to the lights, then I have a couple of holes here in each room.
Right.
I now patch, and then I am definitely painting every single room.
But Joe, that wasn't insurmountable.
Yeah, that's not a
insurmountable.
big project.
One floor, probably not.
Right,
Right.
and we didn't ask the contractor for any kind of estimate on that
Yeah.
as well, and
One thing that could be useful is think of it as an iterative thing. Look at the 2.5 million today, maybe talk to Kevin about, what does he have a understanding of his budget? What's known, and then basically say what's left over. And then
How far can you
understanding
get with
whatever
it?
that leftover amount is, can say, well, is this realistic to deploy in A, B, or C ways? And then once you know what that amount, I mean, it could be, a lot of money, it could be very little money. But it might be good to look at that comprehensively really fast, identify it, and then move
So we
on.
really don't know how much money we spent on the IT piece yet. And then 2 weeks ago, last week, we said to Kevin and his crew, we want to do full-blown AV stuff for every committee room. And now, I mean, so we took that 2.5 million and we've got a number spent out of that already.
Are you sure that's out of the same 2.5 million?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So now we've got another ask of IT that we need to figure out. I think we need to be a little bit careful right now on continuing to pile on $2.5 million.
Catherine?
So I share the pressure of time. I think you understand what it could take. I worry, it feels like if you could provide some guidance, like, yes, we're interested in this, and go figure it out.
Yeah.
It's hard to get going because there's sort of the chicken and the egg in this discussion. So if there was interest, Janet could go try to get more estimates, and she could, if you say, I'm gonna live within I think we're gonna live within the 2.5, we can talk to Kevin, we can talk to Janet, and, but it sounds like you all would like to do something that fits in the budget that can get done by December, and it's reasonable, and you could direct the sergeant at arms to go do what she's able to do to make it, and it might just be wiring, it might be wiring, painting just the first floor, it might be, I don't know, what we're gonna have issues with contractors and the supplies, so I want to try to get the ball going because time is flying by, and it's,
We can't give Janet marching orders because that's not the prerogative of this committee. We actually have to get a recommendation to the Joint Legislative Management Committee. And our report is due the 15th of August. But it seems to me the timing is of such a concern that we have to get a meeting of the Joint Legislative Management Committee prior to the official report coming down in order for the Joint Legislative Management Committee to take whatever recommendations we can deliver them before the report and get them to give Janet marching orders on what to do. But it seems to me that there are priorities here that ought to be listed as priorities. The first being IT has to be the main concern on that 2.5 million. The second is the new bathroom setup. And the third would be whether we're going to do just an initial electric concern for Arlene or rewiring the entire building. But at some point, we're going to run over that 2.5 million figure. But we have to get word to the Joint Legislative Management Committee to get these conversations in an agenda for them to take action on and give you some marching orders.
So are we sure they're the final say and not the emergency board or joint fiscal?
In the language.
Okay.
Michael?
So I agree with Senator Benning that for the expenditure and the authorization to do the work, the language is pretty clear. It's JLMC or joint rules, whichever is the most appropriate body. The sergeant at arms has control over the buildings used in the Capitol complex by the legislature. And Joe can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe any state agency can petition BGS for estimates to do a project, correct? I think that's already within the authority of the state agency. So if Janet is just looking for estimates,
yeah,
she can use the existing authority to get estimates from BGS and probably can do it through the simplified bidding process.
I don't want to speak to BGS because I feel like they're so overloaded, so.
I
They got a
agree.
lot of big projects they're working on.
Right. When we did the copy room, we didn't have the money to do it, but we still asked for the bid to do it, and then we got the money until we figured out how much it was going to cost.
right.
So I'm not sure why we couldn't do that here. If you wanted to do that.
I agree with you completely on getting the estimates. One of the problems in IT is ordering equipment takes a while. Installing it also takes a while. We can't really wait until the 15th. And just so all of you know, I believe Alice and I both have contacted leadership, say get a meeting of JLMC together because we've got to have those questions for IT solidified and given marching orders to Kevin. I don't know whether you're going to run into the same problem with a bathroom and with rewiring. Assuming it doesn't happen overnight, those things have to take place. And we're running out of time.
Yeah, and we don't want to let those federal dollars go to
Oh, we
waste.
definitely do not want to let those federal dollars.
If joint rules is the other option, we could be, serving on joint rules,
So-
pulled together pretty
So
quick.
let me read the language. The sum of 2.5 from the CARES Act Coronavirus Relief Fund is appropriated to the legislature for cost incurred due to the response of COVID-19 and to fund preparations for the 2022 legislative session, consistent with Joint Legislative Management Committee recommendations. Their recommendations are going to be coming from our recommendations. The funds may be transferred to the appropriate units within the General Assembly as necessary, and any transfers shall be reviewed and approved through traditional transfer approval processes by the Secretary of Administration and shall be reported to JFO. It shall be reported by JFO to the Joint Legislative Management Committee and Commissioner of Finance and Management.
That last piece is just what we put on, because we're gonna be transferring money from.
One pot to
When I go
another.
to Kevin's budget, for example, can I transfer money from the legislative budget to Kevin's budget, things like that. So that last part is just speaking to how we manage that process.
So it would be, the funds would be released based on the Joint Legislative Management Committee's recommendations. And those recommendations will come from us in our report,
Depending on what they decide.
depending what,
Depending on what they decide.
right. So who would then ask Janet to kind of do a little deeper dive here to figure out what some of the costs are?
Well, can't we ask that now? I think that was what Mike was saying, is at any point Janet can ask.
Can ask BGS. The
Right.
question is BGS is so overloaded. Can Janet go out on her own and do it with the folks that she's talking with
Like she did with the bathroom.
and with the wiring?
Right, for both 2A camp and the bathroom here, we had a contractor here. And he's going to put a price together for that estimate. So I'll give you a better.
For the bathroom and also for the wiring of the first floor?
Just inside, I was, not the whole first floor. We did not extend it that far.
Just
We
the
only looked
HR,
at the HR area.
but I thought there wasn't too much wiring.
There is not. I mean, we would have to develop that scope a little bit more and say, could you give us an estimate on that? And so we're using their expertise without a set of plans and specifications to put that together. So like, if you look at the bathroom out here, they could be putting together ADA's compliant toilet and sink. The architect could actually specify something else. And so there could be a cost difference. Same with the finishes, the floor, the walls, stuff like that. So I wouldn't go out and get 3 estimates to do that, because that's not how you're bidding it. Right now, we're just getting an estimate. You have a rough idea of what that would cost would be.
It's a different contractor for the electrical work at 280.
Well, depending on
It is,
which
so.
way you went, you could hire a contractor then who hires out the electric piece.
And do both.
And you're gonna, if you do the rewiring throughout, even at the first floor, and it includes punching holes in walls and ceilings, if you hire the electrical company to do that work, they're gonna hire the painter to patch the holes and everything else, or you have the general contractor who we spoke to manages all of that, to clean up the works.
Eric, you had your hand up, and then Stephen.
I
And
just-
Butch, did you have your hand?
Yeah.
Thank you. As we talk about potentially scaling up this project, I just wanted to ask Joe in front of everybody else, is there a point at which it will scale up to a point where you don't feel confident that BGS has the bandwidth to support it? You love to say yes. The RPG, yes, but
The project manager that we have selected for just the HR portion of it would change. It's really about, if the contractor has the ability to do that, whether it's the one that we were talking about or somebody else to come in. So there is that.
And Butch?
Because having a general contractor act as your advocate to help manage the process will help take some of the load off the sergeant at arms in the next number of months to facilitate getting it done. But if you can't find, or if they, as a contractor, can't guarantee a project manager to support them on your behalf to facilitate it, it will load you up with those responsibilities instead. That's just something that work through.
We don't want to give Janet more work than she can handle. You got a lot going on. Butch?
Thanks. So I'm a little concerned that we've got Project Scope Creep going on. That we started out with making a suitable office for HR. Now we're rewiring a third of the building. Was it 3 stories?
3 stories.
Yeah. Now we're rewiring at least 1/3 of the building, and probably more, because you're never just going to rewire 1 floor. It's going to creep into the 2nd floor, then creep into the 3rd floor. So I personally think we need to concentrate on our goal and task here. It's paying for the IT, paying for the bathroom, which I think we can make a great case for, and then making a suitable workspace for HR, which crept in last week. But that's doable. So I think we should. And then the other piece could be an alternate. It could be down the road. If we have money left out of the 2.5, maybe it could be a piece of it. But I don't think, I think it would be, seeing how we don't have to really do any wiring to put HR into that building, I don't think it would be appropriate to start now to talk about rewiring to Aiken when we don't even know what we're going to use the building for. So I think we should stay focused on, the issue at hand.
And part of the issue at hand is, what I'm picking up from some members, we have money that's used that we don't want to lose. So do we, for the sake of using that money, do something with it? Or do we let it go because we know we're not at that point of knowing what we're doing with 2 Aiken as a whole. That's where we are. And maybe in terms of trying to get to a decision point on this, maybe we need more numbers to know what it's gonna cost to do wiring of the first floor, possibly wiring of the second, and third floor. Now, I'm gonna throw another monkey wrench in here. I think Joe knows where I'm headed. If you're gonna do electrical upgrades and wiring in that whole building, while you're at it, you're gonna wanna deal with the airflow ventilation issue. Because you're gonna be tearing up walls.
But that will then exceed our 2.5.
Well, the wiring could exceed our, but you don't have the full 2.5. So, I mean, that's where you get into your creeping up the scope of what you're doing.
But if we don't want to,
Go ahead.
but we don't want to leave any federal dollars on the table. So we want to spend everything we're able to do as much as we're able. So the numbers are critically important. We need to know what these numbers are. Just to support our chair, that's what we need, is we need to know, because we then want to do mission creep as much as we can afford. I think that we want to do upgrades as much as we can afford and no more. I think, our limit is.
How do we get those numbers to know what we're dealing with?
Yeah, we have a hard stop at 2.5.
Can you just go and have further conversations with the contractor or not?
No, I think he was open to that. We wanted to start small and what needed to be done immediately so that we could get HR in there. And I think he would be willing to come back and discuss the next piece. And Joe, do you think
Whatever
that's?
the next piece is.
Well, no, but I mean, we had talked about like the first floor electric, make sure we're not putting money that we're not, an improvement that we would have to take out. We wouldn't want to do that. And so that's where Joe comes in to help us figure that out.
I think when you're looking at it as a whole, are you going to want air conditioning with fan coil units versus in the windows?
Long-term, yes.
Yes.
Set your electrical load.
And the electrical's there for that. It just has to be come out of the main panel to where it needs to go. But then you also are going to be cutting holes in the walls and ceilings and the floors to run that piping to all the fan coil units.
So you mean long-term AC would be a integrated cooling heating system, so you wouldn't have these ugly individual units in each room, right?
In the window.
Yeah.
You would still have like in the rooms here, you would still have something probably by the window, certainly on the outside wall, that was going to provide you with a fan blowing, still not providing you with fresh air. The windows are old, single pane with storms, so you're still going to get some air coming in. But then you want to tackle the ceilings, and then you want to tackle. If you were to want to spend the money, maybe it's a design you're looking at.
Right.
Move into fit up what do you need to do for the HR and spend that money on a mechanical, electrical engineer, an architect, and a structural engineer to bring that whole thing together. There's your total scope. And get an estimate on it.
That's a good point.
Welcome to the world of construction. So Joe, I think you want to say something.
Sure, I don't think we can come to any answers without the numbers.
Yep.
I think in pursuing the numbers, it would be wise to at least ask for different options.
Right.
To Aiken. We can look at the numbers when we get them and make decisions. But we are running out of time. That's a critical component.
Can that be done by next week? That you can have some.
We can make a call and see.
Make a
If we
call.
don't ask, we won't know.
It might be
For
tight.
everything in for 2 Aiken.
Say that again, Joe, what part?
For everything.
For everything that I just discussed, structural.
Oh,
ceilings,
yes, yeah.
Architect.
Well, different options.
Now into like half.
At the first floor, what would that cost be? And then if we expanded the electrical to the other floors, and then if you want to add on air circulation or HVAC system, that's another
I mean, we could give
So you
part
got
of it.
different options here.
We could talk to the contractor and,
It's a ballpark figure, real broad ballpark figures.
we'll just do it.
You always do?
I mean, that's what it is until
That's
you
what it
start the
is.
design.
Right.
Into it, so.
So let's see if we can do that. And I want to take a break.
Before he goes, can I just ask, first name officially does not have an A at the end, is that correct?
That is correct. As an I.
Sorry, what did you say, Joe?
I asked him about the spelling of his first name because one of our next witnesses, I have to point out a typo. That's okay. Thanks.
So Senator Bloomer, we are not senator, you're not a senator anymore, you were.
We always we always get that moniker.
We're dating each other here. We are running really late. So what I suggest doing, if the committee's okay with this, that we take a quick 10-minute break and then pick up with our parliamentarian from the Senate first.
How exciting.
And then we can do our discussion of overflow
Great. And I have cookies here for the break.
on the report.
And you got.
Okay, so let's take a very quick 10-minute break, please.
And guys, for our popular demand, we have these shortbreads back and we